On your EOC, you're going to have, there are 18 questions that will be asked about revising and editing. So you have 18 revising and editing questions. You have your essay, and then the rest of the questions are multiple choice on reading comprehension. So a fiction passage, probably a poem, an informational article, a persuasive article, and they'll ask you comprehension questions. So it's kind of three big parts to the EOC. The revising and editing questions, usually there's 4 passages, 2 of them that ask questions about revising, 2 of them that ask questions about editing, okay? So does anyone know the difference between the revising type questions and the editing type questions? No. So with the revising type questions, they're asking you how sentences can be better structured, ideas that should be added that maybe aren't there to help make the text stronger, ideas that should be completely taken out because they're extra ideas that don't really fit. They'll ask maybe how to make a stronger, which sentence would be a stronger position statement. It's revising the passage more along the lines of the ideas presented, okay? The editing passages are more corrections that need to be made. So there'll be things like capitalization errors, commas, punctuation, other types of punctuation. So editing, you're fixing mistakes. Revising, you're making changes to make the ideas stronger. Those are the 2 main ideas. So they go, you'll have 2 revising passages, then 2 passages where they ask editing questions, okay? What I want us to look at today, what we're gonna look at is an editing passage and some sample questions that you might be asked around editing. So fixing mistakes. Does that make sense? Okay, so what I suggest you do with the revising and the editing passages is you can always tell it's the revising and editing passages because they number each sentence. And they do that because when they ask questions about the sentences, that makes it clearer to find which sentence they're asking about. I don't suggest that you read those passages for understanding. You don't have to scrutinize them to read them ahead of time. Scan them, read through them so you have an idea of what the topic is, but don't study them and annotate them and try to figure them out the same way we do our fiction and poetry and stuff, because you're not going to be asked those kind of comprehension questions. We're just going to be fixing or revising, right? So don't read them at great depth, scan them for understanding, okay? So we see this one is called Smells Like a Memory. We're not going to read it all together. We're just going to go ahead and skip to the questions. But if we were taking it for EOC, we would want to scan it and read through it a little bit. All right, so let's look at some of the types of editing questions we might see on our EOC, okay? So the first question in this sample says, what change, if any, needs to be made in sentence 2? Now, when it says what change, if any, that means they're gonna have an answer choice that says, no, this sentence shouldn't be changed, it's just fine, okay? All of them won't say that. Like you can see looking at this, like this one doesn't have a should not be changed. They won't all have that, but some of them might have where there should be no change made. I've known students in the past who, if they see that there's an option that it shouldn't be changed, they pick that automatically without even reading it because they assume that's going to be the right answer. That's a really bad strategy. So don't do that. If you see that there's a should not be changed, it might be one of the right answers, but it's not going to necessarily always be the answer. Okay, so don't just automatically pick that. We need to go through the process of seeing, is that the fact or is it one of the others? All right. So sentence 2. What I like to do on the editing questions is if it's asking me a question about a specific sentence, before I read my answer choices, I go to that sentence and I read it and see, do I notice any errors? Okay, because sometimes if I look at it and go, ooh, that's misspelled, and then I can go back to my question and see, oh yeah, that's one of the things, more than likely I've chosen what the right answer choice is. So let's go back to sentence 2. And just read it. Suddenly being transported back to childhood as a memory plays in my mind like a movie. Does that sound right? Suddenly being transported back to childhood as a memory plays in my mind like a movie. No, that doesn't even sound right. So we know it's not going to be, should not be changed, because clearly something is wrong with that sentence. So now let's look at our answer choices and see what there is. Now, to me, it sounds like, oops. It sounds like suddenly being transported back to childhood. It sounds like there's a problem with that first part of the sentence, because as a memory plays in my mind like a movie, that makes sense to me. So it's going to be something to do with this first chunk of sentence. So one of our answer choices, our very first answer choice actually, says change being to I am. So if we go back and read it with that, suddenly I am transported back to childhood as a memory plays in my mind like a movie. That sounds pretty good, right? Like suddenly I'm transported back to childhood. That fixes what was wrong with that sentence. So we'll go through our other answer choices real quick and make sure they are not better or other corrections. Insert a comma after childhood, or change plays to playing. Suddenly being transported back to childhood, comma, as a memory plays in my mind like a movie. You probably could put a comma there to separate this clause from this, but that still makes that wrong. So that's not going to be the right answer. And as a memory playing in my mind like a movie, that still doesn't fix this problem. So it is a verb problem. So we would change being to I am. Okay. So one of the types of questions you are probably going to be asked is going to be about changing verb tenses. It may say is when it should be are. It might say she were instead of she was. So pay attention to those helping verbs, because usually there's at least one question that asks about a helping verb that needs to be changed in its tense. Okay. So the second question, the second example, what is the correct way to write sentence 5? So there's no should not be changed answer. So we know something's wrong with sentence 5 and we need to fix it. So if we go back to it, sentence 5 reads, I pull gently at its crisp brown shell. The aroma of its gooey sweetness teases my nostrils. Okay, so we know something's wrong with it. I pull gently at its crisp brown shell, comma, the aroma of its gooey sweetness teases my nostrils. Well, when we talked last week about clauses, remember we talked about independent clauses and dependent clauses, and they're separated with what? A comma, yeah. So since I have a sentence here with one comma separating two clauses, I would expect to find one of them being independent, meaning it's a full sentence, but the other one should be a dependent clause or not a full sentence, right? Because I've just got one comma separating two clauses. But if I read it, I pull gently at its crisp brown shell, that's a full sentence. On the other side, the aroma of its gooey sweetness teases my nostrils, that's a full sentence too. So I have two full sentences separated by a comma. Is that correct with grammar? Is that correct punctuation? No, how could I separate two full sentences? If the choice was to leave them as two full sentences, what punctuation could separate two full sentences? A semicolon, yay, yes, absolutely. If I wanted a comma, I would need something else there. What else would I need there? Do you remember? And, yeah, one of the fanboys, and, nor, but, or, so. So you could use a comma and a fanboy or a semicolon to separate two full sentences. So if we look at our answer choices, none of my answer choices are offering me a semicolon. None of my answer choices are offering me a comma with the fanboy. So that means they're going to have to change one of those two clauses to be a dependent clause. I pull gently at its crisp brown shell. The aroma of its gooey sweetness, that teases my nostrils. That doesn't do it. As I pull gently at its crisp brown shell, the aroma of its gooey sweetness teases my nostrils. That actually does it, because as I pull gently at its crisp brown shell, now we have a dependent clause. So I wanted you guys to see this example, because that's how, if they're going to ask a question related to dependent clauses and independent clauses, this is how it could look, okay? Where they're going to ask you to make a change where a dependent clause needs to be adjusted or an independent clause. That's what that could look like on your EOC. Okay, so B is actually going to be the correct answer, because these other two, they do the same thing. Pulling gently at its crisp brown shell, the aroma of its gooey sweetness teasing my nostrils. That doesn't work because they changed the verb tense. When I pull gently at its crisp brown shell, that is an independent, or that is a dependent clause, but then they put a comma and an and. They put a fanboy in there, and that doesn't do it. So read them aloud. If you see two full sentences, you know you need the comma and the fanboy or a semicolon. If it's just a comma, then you have to have a dependent and an independent is probably going to be what they're looking for with correct verb tenses. Okay. All right, let's look at one more here. So number 12, how should sentence 8 be changed? The smell of the freshly cut grass reminds me of my 12-year-old self playing soccer on a Saturday morning. So just looking at that sentence, does anyone see anything that looks not correct? Soccer is capitalized, yeah. And soccer should not be capitalized because it's just a common noun. It's a sport. Okay, so soccer being capitalized is out of place. Let's see if that's an answer choice, and it is. So we could confidently choose J there because soccer should not be capitalized. Okay, so capitalization questions could look like that. They will capitalize a common noun and make it look like a proper noun, and your answer choice should be to change it back. Or sometimes they do the other way around. They could have, if they wanted to ask about proper capitalization in that same sentence, they may have put a lowercase s on the word Saturday. That would have been not correct for capitalization because Saturday is the name of the day and it would have been capitalized. Okay. I know these are kind of boring, but I want your mind kind of refreshed about some of these rules so that when you see them, they can maybe jump out at you a little more quickly. You can be a little more confident in them. All right, let me see if there's any. Oh, no, we're going to do 13 as well because I want to show you that rule. So what change, if any, is needed in sentence 18? So we're going to go back to sentence 18. This has a rule I want to point out as well. The brain is wired in such a way that the sense of smell is processed near the centers of emotion and memory. Does anything sound wrong with that one? The brain is wired in such a way that the sense of smell is processed near the centers of emotion and memory. Yeah, the apostrophe on centers. When do we use an apostrophe? What's the apostrophe rule? If I was going to use an apostrophe, that would mean there is something belonging to someone else. There's possession going on. If I said Miss Soesby's coffee, Soesby's would have the apostrophe S. It's my coffee, right? Or if I said this is Miss Soesby's iPad, the iPad belongs to me, so Soesby's would have an apostrophe S. But if someone came in the room and said, hey, there's 20 iPads in this room, that just means more than one. If it just means more than one, no apostrophe. It's just an S, okay? And so in this case, centers doesn't make sense. It's just, they just mean two centers, the emotional center and the memory center, or whatever the two were. So it's just plural. It's not possessive, plural. So pay attention to that, the apostrophes, because wanting to make sure that you understand apostrophe rules is something I've seen tested almost on every test, okay? So look for that. Don't choose it automatically just because you see an apostrophe, but make sure you take into account, okay, does this just mean more than one? If so, no apostrophe. Or is it saying that this is a belonging to something else? And then there would be, okay? All right. The other thing in your answer choices, there will probably be spelling change, one way of spelling something to another way of spelling something. There's no reason to get those wrong because you have a dictionary, right? So make sure if you're not, like if you read this question and you're like, oh, should innocent be changed? Look it up. Don't guess. Oh, I think that's how you spell it. There's no reason to miss the spelling ones because you have a dictionary. Okay. All right. Are there any burning grammar or punctuation rules that you want me to go over or review that come to mind right now? Okay. One of the reasons, you know, the revising and editing passages, the way they lay out the questions in your EOC, you start with the revising and editing passages because those tend to be a little, I don't want to say easier because they're not easier for some people, but they just feel less stressful. And so, but take your time on them, but don't fret too much. Look at it, go back and forth, check, read it aloud in your head, you know, go through those things. And then if you have any that you're just not sure of, flag them, but then you come back to them. And I'll show you when we look at the app how you can flag a question and then come back to it later. Okay. The next thing I want to look at is the rubric. We're going to look at the rubric. And so it is electronically for you in our teaching module this week, and it's called English 2-Star Persuasive Writing Rubric. But I have some hard copies that y'all can borrow in class if you would prefer to have a hard copy to look at. When you're looking at, so on your essay, when you write your essay, you'll receive a score of a 1, 2, 3, or 4, okay? And 1 is at the weak end, 4 is at the more accomplished end. So we're shooting for 3s and 4s on our essay writing. And if you look at the rubric, so there's the columns describing the criteria for each of those score points, but the rubric is also broken into 3 big sections, okay? And so when the person who is scoring your essay looks at your essay, they're going to give it a score in each of these 3 areas. But then, depending on where the majority of the essay fell, they'll give it a holistic score. So for example, in this first section, if I was grading an essay, I thought, okay, this student meets the criteria for a 2. In this section, they meet the criteria for a 2. In this section, they meet the criteria for a 3, but I'm not going to give it a 3 because holistically, it's more of a 2. Okay, so you could have fall in different areas on the rubric, but holistically, it's going to give you, they're going to give you the score where the majority of the essay lands, right? So I want to talk to you just briefly about what each of these sections are about, because when you're writing your essay, you want to have an awareness that you're hitting certain things in each of these criteria. You don't have to memorize this. You don't have to feel like, oh my goodness, this is a lot of words. I have to, like, there's a lot to know. There's some big basic principles, and they're the things that we've talked about already in class that if you try to hit these marks, you'll be just fine, okay? So the first section is labeled organization and progression. Organization and progression. And what it's referring to is, how is this essay organized? Does this writer follow a progression of thoughts that supports the position they're taking? The first paragraph in that organization and progression section, what I'm reading, I'm going to read from the score point 4 column, because that's what we're shooting for. So for score point 4, the organizing structure is clearly appropriate to the purpose and responsive to the demands of the prompt. The essay is skillfully crafted because the writer uses organizational strategies that are suited to the persuasive task. Do you state your position? Do you support your position with evidence? Do you show somewhere along the way that there might be another side to consider, and do you address that counter argument or show the complexity of the argument? And do you conclude it? That's when it means organization, that's really what we're talking about, okay? And we've talked about that, right? You want your introduction, you want your position in your introduction, and that takes it to the next paragraph. The second paragraph in that organization section says, the writer establishes a clear position, right? It's not vague or confused. It's not, well, I'm not really sure what to say in response to this prompt, but you don't say things like that. You take a position and you support it. All ideas are strongly related to this position and are focused on the issue in the prompt. And that's a big thing, because remember last week we talked about how they give you a quote, they give you a think about statement, and then they tell you what you're going to write about. If your essay is all about the quote and you're not writing about what's in the prompt, you're not going to score very well in this, because the prompt is what we're responding to. We're not writing all about the quote or all about the other things. And then in organization, the progression of ideas, meaning how you move from your introduction to your next idea, to your next idea, to your conclusion. The progression is logical and well controlled. What is it? What do you think why would they put that phrase well controlled in there? What would a well controlled essay do? Exactly. Yep. It's a weird phrase, but basically what it means is stay on track, stay focused. Your sentences are controlled, meaning you don't go off on a tangent. You don't start talking about something completely unrelated, right? Your essay stays on point. And that's it for that top section. That's what they're looking for. Okay. Are you responding to the prompt? Is your position clear? Is it organized in such a way that the reader can follow it? The second section is called development of ideas. And to get a 4 in that area, development of ideas is highly effective. The argument is forceful and convincing because the reasons and evidence are specific and well chosen. So that's why brainstorming different ideas for evidence to support your position comes into importance. And you want a specific idea. So for example, in our spontaneity prompt, is it better to be spontaneous or to have the quality of detailed planning? If you said it's better to be someone who does detailed planning, instead of just saying something general like because it could help you with your future, that would be very general. More specific would be when I was planning my college course, or when I was planning my high school courses, I thought ahead to what I wanted to do in college. And in doing that, I made a plan for each year of high school, what I wanted to accomplish that would help me when, it's more detailed. It's not just staying general or vague. It's giving specific examples. Okay. And then we also want to be thoughtful and engaging. So again, more specific examples tend to be more thoughtful and engaging than something that's just general, because it'll help you down the line. Like, that's very general. Talking specifically about how is more thoughtful, and considering opposing or alternate points of view, his or her unique experiences, and connect ideas in interesting ways. And so that's where, if you can think about the counter argument or the complexities of the issue, in some cases it might be better to do this. This is my position on it. Okay. And then the last section, use of language and conventions. We're talking about choices of words. Are you making interesting word choices? Grammar, punctuation, spelling, sentence, like, are you using different types of sentences? So instead of just simple sentences, are some of your sentences more complex? And are you using a variety of words? So use the thesaurus, look up different types of interesting words in your essay. That'll help in this section. Okay. And I wanted to point out too, in that 4 column under usage and convention. So right down here, it says although minor errors may be evident, they don't detract from the fluency of the writing or the clarity of the essay. So your essay doesn't have to be perfect. I wanted to show you that. It doesn't say that it has to be perfect and error-free. You can have errors and still get a 4. So don't, make sure you're using punctuation, of course, because I've seen essays that have no punctuation whatsoever, no paragraphs, no capital letters, no commas, no periods. Don't do that. Please don't do that. I know it can be hard when you're typing on the iPad sometimes to do that capital letter, do that punctuation, but you need to, okay? You need to use punctuation and proper spelling and grammar to the best of your ability, okay? Because it'll enhance the quality of the essay. Okay, so that is the rubric that you will be graded against. So what I'd like you to do is, in our assignment in Canvas, there is an assignment called Essay Reflection. And let me go back to it. And so also I've opened up, so that's in this week's module. The essay is actually in last week's module. So you'll have to go back to that one to look at what you wrote. Essay practice, the real one. So if you submitted an essay, go back to that to actually view what you submitted. And then in this week's module, there's an essay reflection assignment where basically you're going to look at your essay and think about the rubric and tell me how you did. And there's not a right or wrong thing I'm looking for with that. I just want to see, in your thoughtful way, what do you think about your essay? Read back through it, look at the rubric, think about what I've said, and tell me what you think about your essay. That's all I'm looking for, okay? So don't stress too much. Oh, did I get that right? Am I explaining this right? I just want to know what you think, and I'm just looking for your thoughts on it. If you didn't do an essay, when you go in the essay reflection assignment, there is a sample there. So